on television station.
This is the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite and Eric Seberide in Washington, Daniel Shore in Washington, Nelson Benton in Washington, Dan Rather in Washington, Robert Shackney in New York, and Bert Quint in Tel Aviv, Israel.
Good evening. On this final weekend of the Johnson administration, the nation's 36th president and the nation's capital are saying farewell to each other. And notably missing is the abuse Mr. Johnson had to bear during the last year of his tenure. From both sides of the aisle, senator after senator arose today to pay him tribute. Among them, Senator Edward Kennedy, who noted that the circumstances which put Johnson in the White House inevitably created speculation about strained relations between their families. But in the senator's words, the differences that developed later on came not from personal grievances, but from the obligation of men in public life to discharge their responsibilities as they saw them. And Kennedy added, "I know that President Johnson understood this, and history will as well." The president himself went to the National Press Club to say goodbye.
If I could have one thing presented to me today that I'd rather have than anything else in the world, it would be that I could bring back from Vietnam all the men I sent out there, and that we could have peace in the world so that those men could come and enjoy being with their families again and enjoy the benefits of our affluence and this great society that we have. So the thing I would like to do most is to find some way, somehow, soon, to bring peace to the world. It has eluded me. I hope that the members of my party will try to treat President Nixon as I tried to treat President Eisenhower. If they do, I believe that they'll find that it'll be the best investment they ever made, not only for their country, but for themselves. President Eisenhower returned that investment to me in my 5 years of presidency with interest and wise counsel and great help. And we are not wise enough to solve these problems if just half of us are aboard. The president's got to have the country's support. I've had a wonderful 5 years. I don't hold a thing in the world against anyone in this town that I know or anywhere else. And I'm leaving this town with nothing but gratitude and love in my heart. I don't know, there's not a Republican in the House or Senate mean enough for me to dislike or hate. Or a Democrat either.
Henry Cabot Lodge, in line to be the new chief U.S. negotiator in Paris, was reported today to feel the first U.S. troop withdrawals from Vietnam might be possible this year if a ceasefire can be worked out and if progress is made at the Paris talks. A possible American troop reduction reportedly was the main topic today at a Saigon meeting between Ambassador Bunker, General Abrams, and South Vietnam's President Thieu. The first procedural session of that enlarged Paris conference takes place tomorrow. Today, there was a taste of how tough the negotiations may be as the Viet Cong reaffirmed that a complete U.S. pullout from Vietnam is its price for peace. Hanoi's representatives in Paris have told U.S. officials that 1968 Christmas packages mailed to American prisoners in North Vietnam did reach the men. Apparently, that's the first time that's happened in the war.
Stomach unhappy. Triactin puts a smile in your tummy. Stomach unhappy. Triactin puts a smile in your tummy. Triactin is a super strength antacid. It not only neutralizes, Triactin relieves the major discomforts of indigestion in a way no simple antacid can. Heartburn, overstuffed feeling, jittery stomach. Put a smile in your tummy. Take Triactin.
Senate committees today informally approved 4 top-level Nixon appointees. The 4 are Robert Finch, Health, Education, and Welfare; Melvin Laird, Defense; David Packard as Laird's deputy; and David Kennedy in the Treasury. The committee accepted Packard's plan for putting $300 million worth of stock in trust, but Kennedy had to modify the trust for his bank stock to satisfy another committee. The cabinet appointee having the hardest time on Capitol Hill is Interior Secretary-designate Walter Hickel. Daniel Shore reports.
Governor Hickel wound up 3 grueling days before the Senate Interior Committee, firming up his commitment to maintain the freeze on Alaska land, promising to get rid of any investments involving a conflict of interest, and denying anything improper in his $1 million interest in a franchise company supplying gas in Anchorage. Finally, his interrogation was over, but then came another part of the ordeal, a parade of public witnesses, most of them vehemently opposed to his confirmation, like David Brower, executive director of the Sierra Club.
Of interest in conservation are given full credit. He will carry the greatest cloud of apprehension to the secretaryship in over 40 years. Even if the governor tries to lead, will anyone follow under the circumstances that now prevail? We can only conclude that it is most unlikely that the Department of the Interior can function effectively under leadership which has been open to so much public resistance. Therefore, in the interest of all concerned, we ask the governor to request that his name be removed from nomination for this position.
Most vehement of all, a representative of militant Indians, Lehman Brightman.
What I'm trying to say is you, the United States, made treaties and contracts with American Indians to take care of us. And if you appoint this man, Mr. Pickle Hickel, if you appoint him as a new Secretary of Interior, we're afraid he's going to give the rest of our country away, our land, and build dams on it, and open it up for settlement, and drain all the oil out of it. Well, you can have the oil under it, but just leave us the land.
So ended the hearings on the most controversial of President-elect Nixon's cabinet nominations. But not for a century has a new president been turned down on his cabinet choices. And the Interior Committee in executive session tomorrow is expected to recommend confirmation. But Hickel has one other problem. Chairman Henry Jackson told CBS News it is a close thing whether he can be confirmed by the Senate along with the rest of the cabinet on inaugural day Monday. The Senate needs a legislative day's notice for nominations, and so any senator's objection could delay Hickel's confirmation until Tuesday. Walter?
The Republican National Treasurer, William Middendorf, reported today that the party spent $21 million in electing Richard Nixon president, that some campaign bills still are to be paid, but the Treasury appears to be in good shape. Anti-war groups in Washington to stage counter-inaugural demonstrations won government approval today to erect a big tent downtown. Nelson Benton reports.
The alliance of anti-war groups started pitching their tent today virtually within the shadow of the Washington Monument, a government-approved rallying point for a parade they'll hold the day before inauguration and the location for a counter-inaugural ball they'll have on Sunday night. The tent, not for sleeping but just for meeting, will hold nearly 10,000 people. The anti-war leaders say they expect no more than that number. They don't know just how many will attend. From here, the peace groups will step off on their Sunday parade down Pennsylvania Avenue. David Dellinger, their chairman, says a coffin will be carried at the head of the march.
Yes, that's a very important part of our act because public attention tends to focus on, what stage the negotiations are, how large is our tent, what will our sign say, a lot of irrelevant issues, basically. And what we want to do is to come right back to the heart of the matter, and that is that every week that the war continues, a couple of hundred Americans and 10 or 20 times that many Vietnamese are being slaughtered.
Dellinger charges that the FBI has harassed some participants and sympathizers. The FBI says the charge is absolute falsehood. Represented in the counter-inaugural, such organizations as the Committee for a Sane Nuclear Policy, the Women's Strike for Peace, a group of servicemen opposed to the war. Missing, the Militant Students for a Democratic Society, although some of its members will take part on an individual basis. And, moving somewhat on their own, the Youth International Party, the Yippies, keeping their own counsel. There is no indication of extra police mobilization because of all of this, but law enforcement is already at extraordinary strength for the inauguration anyway. Walter?
medical experts photographs, x-rays, and clothing of President John Kennedy, and they agree with the Warren Commission that he was killed by 2 bullets fired from behind. The conclusion of the panel's secret study last year were made public by the Justice Department, which had requested the review of this closely guarded material. The experts all are medical professors, and Dan Rather talked with one of them, Dr. Russell Fisher.
The other bullet struck the president at the right side of the base of the neck.
Excuse me, this would be
which would be in this area. It emerged in the front from the midline at the level of the thigh. The possibility that this may have followed any other pathway than the one we just indicated was considered, but there was no evidence found to indicate that this was true. There was clearly a track between the wound in the back of the body and the wound in the front of the neck. Any other pathway connecting those wounds than the direct back-to-front pathway that we believe was present would certainly have, or almost certainly have struck bone. There was no evidence in the x-rays that he had bone injury within the neck.
Doctor, I'm sure you know the theory that's been put forth since the Warren Commission report, that this wound that showed in the throat and near the base of the back of the neck could have been inflicted from the front. That is, there was a tracheotomy performed at the time there was an attempt to save the president's life, and the tracheotomy so confused that wound that no one can say with certainty from what direction that wound was inflicted.
The findings at our examination clearly show that there was an entrance wound in the back of the body. This was characteristic of an entrance wound, and since this wound was connected by a track to the wound in the front, there can be no other conclusion than that the bullet exited in the front. The x-rays showed there was no bullet still in this part of the body.
You found no evidence of anything more than 2 bullet wounds.
That's correct.
New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison, among others, believes that Lee Harvey Oswald had accomplices in the assassination. Garrison sought the autopsy material to prove his conspiracy theory in a trial which had been scheduled to start next week. But a Washington judge refused to subpoena the material, saying Garrison first must prove his need for it. In New Orleans, station WWL-TV filmed Assistant District Attorney James Alcock's reaction to the developments.
The release by Attorney General Ramsey Clark of an opinion by a panel of so-called experts which purports to back the findings of the Warren report on the eve of the trial of Clay Shaw makes it absolutely necessary for us to obtain the photographs and x-rays of the autopsy, as well as the clothing worn by President Kennedy on the day that he was assassinated. Prior to the release of this opinion, it was our intention to proceed to trial with or without this material. However, since Ramsey Clark has released only a small portion of the evidence, and only that which favors the defense and the Warren report, it is absolutely necessary that we obtain that evidence upon which the panel based their opinion of the autopsy before proceeding to trial. This was another effort by the federal government to aid the defense and to stop the prosecution by the state of Louisiana of Clay Shaw. Therefore, I am today filing a motion requesting a continuance of this case to be reset only after receipt by this office of all of the evidence called for in our subpoenas of the evidence used in the autopsy report and all other evidence secretly held by the federal government. In the event the federal government does not honor our subpoenas and blocks our attempt to present all of the evidence, this case cannot be brought to trial.
In the Sirhan murder trial in Los Angeles, the judge today excused a foe of capital punishment who had been seated tentatively on the jury.
Fever. You want the strongest fever fighter you can buy. Aspirin. Get Bayer aspirin because Bayer is 100% aspirin, and aspirin is the strongest fever fighter you can buy. You see, a Get Well Picture and Bayer Aspirin. They work wonders. Here's an important word from Bayer in case the flu epidemic hits your home. When the flu strikes, doctors and public health officials urge you to follow these 3 steps. Rest in bed, drink plenty of fluids, and take aspirin to reduce the fever and relieve the aches. So get Bayer Aspirin now. Bayer is 100% aspirin, the world's best aspirin. And aspirin is what doctors and public health officials recommend. For the pains and fever of a cold or flu, Bayer works wonders.
The State Department has told CBS News that some of the hijackers in Cuba have been jailed and others forced to work on sugar farms. This followed a report by Canadian newsman Bill Edwards of Montreal station CKGM that Cuba has sentenced 18 airline hijackers to 5-year prison terms because they are not bona fide political refugees. This represents more than half the hijackers to reach Havana. Edwards said that Castro has not made his crackdown public because he wants the world to believe that all the hijackers fled the United States out of dissatisfaction with its political system. The French today formally proposed meeting with the United States, Britain, and the Soviet Union concerning the Middle East. The statement called for the Big Four talks to take place within the framework of the UN Security Council, but such a conference is considered unlikely at this time, partly in the belief it would undermine the UN's own efforts to work out a Middle East solution. The Israelis are still angry over de Gaulle's embargo on French arms deliveries to them, and in Tel Aviv yesterday, Israeli students marched on the French embassy. Bert Quint was there.
From Jerusalem and from Haifa, as well as this city, they came for this, Israel's first large student demonstration ever, bearing signs that showed that even when the going is tough, they still can maintain a sense of humor. Police wouldn't let them parade their horse, poor people's march style, so one young man took a sign, obviously adapted from a slogan of some American demonstrators, away from old Dobbin and carried it himself. Make love, not embargoes, it admonished de Gaulle. One of the signs says, 1945, de Gaulle was a hero. 1969, de Gaulle is a zero. Then there was one that, for students, showed bad spelling as well as questionable taste. General de Gaulle is the product, it said, of unplanned parenthood. One student tried to explain the demonstration.
We think that people coming to the streets are the only way to demonstrate against such a thing, because all the diplomatic ways have already been tried, and this is the only way that was left to us, to the students and to people in Israel, to demonstrate against all this policy of de Gaulle and the French government.
When the demonstrators gathered outside of the embassy, they found their way blocked by a few policemen, and there was a bit of pushing, a lot of booing. Israel is upset by the French embargo. It feels that it has been betrayed by a country that used to be its friend. Bert Quint, CBS News, Tel Aviv.
In Czechoslovakia, a group of university students reportedly has made a suicide pact to protest press censorship and publication of a Soviet occupation newspaper. 15 students are said to have agreed to set themselves on fire, one after another, every 3 days until demands are met. The first student to try it yesterday is in critical condition in a Prague hospital.
Of all the toothpastes that promise to get teeth whiter, which one gets them the whitest? Just recently, a major dental clinic tested the leading brand's promising whiteness. The clinic did the brushing. The clinic did the rating. And McLean's won. Of the leading brands that promise to get teeth whiter, McLean's got them the whitest. Shouldn't you be using the winner?
I came back to Brill Cream. I tried another hairdressing, but I didn't like the way my hair looked. So I came back to that little dab of Brill Cream because it leaves my hair looking natural. We all came back to Brill Cream.
And we're glad they did.
Brill Cream, the best-selling hair dressing in the world.
A government survey shows that every fifth Negro child in the South was attending a desegregated school last fall, the biggest annual gain yet in school integration. The Justice Department today filed an antitrust suit against the giant International Business Machines Corporation seeking to force IBM to sell its computers, programming information, and related services separately rather than as a package deal. Roy Cohn, the boy wonder of the McCarthy era, was indicted in New York today on federal conspiracy charges of bribery, blackmail, and extortion. One count charged Cohn with actually paying a bribe inside a U.S. courthouse. The charges involved the affairs of the old Fifth Avenue coach lines. Cohn already was awaiting trial on securities charges involving the company. FBI agents have joined police in the search for two men who held up a bank in Poughkeepsie, New York yesterday, and they should have no trouble identifying them as a result of these scenes recorded by the bank camera, described by CBS News correspondent Robert Shackney.
If a Hollywood director had been there, he could not have placed the bandits much more in center stage or in better focus for the hidden camera. As one robber pointed a rifle and lined customers and tellers up against a wall, his accomplice scooped up $76,000 in cash, and using a frightened teller as hostage, he moved to the door and to a getaway car. The hostage was freed immediately, unharmed, and no shots had been fired. The alarm was sounded promptly. The branch manager was on the phone when the robbers first entered, and one witness was able to remember the getaway car's license number. Bank authorities say they're relieved that there was no violence, and equally they're pleased that the pictures give police the kind of clues they like to have but usually don't get. These are the bank robbers. This is the bandit who pointed the gun. And his accomplice, the thief who scooped up the cash.
The National Communicable Disease Center said today that the Hong Kong flu is on the wane in the United States, but it probably will be around for a good number of years yet. The center said that reports from 122 cities showed that in the 6 weeks the disease was at its peak, 6,805 persons died from flu and pneumonia. 3 of the Russian cosmonauts returned to Earth today, landing safely in the Soviet Union. The 4th remained in orbit and was not expected to land before tomorrow. The British cruise ship Carmania was refloated today by 3 tugs after being aground for 5 days in the Bahamas. The New York Stock Exchange had a mixed session today in moderately active trading. Volume totaled 11,600,000 shares. The exchange index lost 5 cents.
Back in the old days, men were the masters, women were the slaves. Women had the duties, men had all the rights. Then, in 1920, women won their rights. And one by one, they won them all.
You've come a long way, baby, to get where you got to today. You got your own cigarette now, baby. You've come a long, long way.
Introducing new Virginia Slims, the slim cigarette for women only, tailored for the feminine hand. Slimmer than the fat cigarettes men smoke, with flavor women like. Rich, mild Virginia flavor. New extra-long Virginia Slims in the slim purse pack.
You got your own cigarette now, baby. You've come a long, long way.
In that farewell address to the National Press Club, President Johnson displayed a joking as well as a serious mood. And here are some of his light remarks.
I have never, I must say, doubted your energy or your courage or, for that matter, your patriotism. That's why I asked General Hershey to get in touch immediately with each of you. Someone told me the other day that the press had had a few complaints about the treatment that you'd received during this administration. Well, this is a fine time to be telling me now. Why didn't you mention it sooner? Well, I've got some complaints of my own. Maybe I should have mentioned them sooner to you. Getting misquoted, for instance, is one thing I've got to complain about. I remember that Peter Hurd painting. You all remember that? I never said it was ugly. Actually, I thought it was a pretty good likeness. Except for one little detail. It left off the halo.
This is Eric Severide in Washington. This capital is still Johnson City, D.C., and will remain so until Monday at high noon. The President is going through in these last hours the bittersweet experience of private and public farewells. A great many people, including senators, are giving him the praise and the credits he no doubt feels are a bit belated. No presidency in a generation has been so bitterly controverted. Whatever the final balance of his failures and great deeds, his mistakes were those of commission, not omission. He not only filled the office, he overpowered it. His worst enemies know that for 5 years there was a man in town. One of his very last appearances was today at the headquarters of the other Washington industry, the press. At times he has been furious with the press, like all presidents before him, but not bitter. And he contented himself with saying that the problem of communicating with and through the press was troublesome, and maybe he suggested that journalists ought to think about this a bit. They often do, individually, but not collectively. An administration may be a monolith, but journalism is diversity itself. The truth is that government and press must continue in a marriage of necessity. Neither can live without the other. It is always in greater or lesser degree an adversary relationship. If the press has no obligation to criticize for the sake of criticism, it also has no obligation to perform as cheerleader. What ultimately angers presidents is a tendency of the press to look automatically for frictions, differences, mistakes. Various organs and individuals undoubtedly overdo this. But in democracy's long run, that is probably healthier than a general tendency to suppress and sugarcoat. To some degree, the press creates the national attitude toward an administration. To a greater degree, it reflects it. No matter a president's personal relations with the press. Mr. Eisenhower was wary of journalists and rarely saw them privately, but he generally enjoyed what is called a good press. Mr. Johnson saw them privately more than any president ever, and this changed next to nothing in their portrayal of his administration. A frequent complaint of public officials is that editors will not accept criticism of themselves. They will dish it out but won't take it. And yesterday, Mrs. Johnson's press aide observed that the press seemed incapable of self-criticism. There is truth in this. There is also truth in the proposition that politicians and public officials are not famous for admitting their own costly mistakes. And it would be hard to call to mind one of them who protested when he was overpraised, another frequent sin of the imperfect press. Walter?
And that's the way it is. Friday, January 17th, 1969. This is Walter Cronkite, CBS News, reporting from Washington. Good night.
Madame, we're out of caviar.
Let's eat egg rolls.
Let's eat egg rolls? Introducing John King's 4 new frozen egg rolls. Shrimp, lobster, meat and shrimp, chicken.
Hot egg rolls in only 9 minutes. Chun King say, when the gang gets together, let 'em eat egg rolls. It's been said she didn't know what to do.
Not true. When my hungry kids can't wait, I reach for Chun King Divider Pack in 2 cans for freshness. Meat and sauce on top, crisp oriental vegetables on the bottom. Just heat and serve, and they all settle.